A big thank you to all of my listeners. And if you would like to support this transmission even more and boost your trading account, go to trendfollowing.com/now. And without any further delay, on to today's show. This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Chase Jarvis. He's an award-winning American photographer, director, artist, and entrepreneur. He was one of the co-founders of Creative Live, an online educational platform. Two big things inspire me about Chase. Number one, as an outsider to the field of photography, for Chase to get to the top of the heap, viewed by many of his peers as one of the best, and to be paid for it. It's a hell of a lot to be learned from going on that journey to find out how he did it. Number two, as an entrepreneur who has launched an online educational platform with millions of participants, you already know there's going to be much to be learned there as well. Also, please note, Chase was kind enough to give my audience a special offer, a special price break on some of the educational content you can find at his site, Creative Live. To see that special link, simply go to the show notes for this podcast. I'm sure I've said it a million times, but I love doing this podcast. I love having diversity here. And as long as I can get very bright people with hugely divergent paths along their way to come onto this show, I'll never stop doing it. And Chase adds to that diverse portfolio. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Chase Jarvis. Let me give a quick refresh and just to pass something along to the audience too, which I think is a smart lesson for everyone to think about. We both met randomly at a Tim Ferriss event 5 years ago. We were on a bus. It was night and we were going to a group. Everyone's going to a group out to dinner or something. And you and I were randomly sitting next to each other, just like, kids on the school bus. I didn't know you. You didn't know me. Not that we should. But the reason I remember you is because you sent me a book. And it's such a small, I'm pretty sure I did the same thing, but it's such a small thing to do. And not that everyone has a book, but there is a way that you can find to make people remember you. And that little thing did. 5 years later, we're doing a podcast. There you go, right?
Nice. I wish I was, I'll just confess, I aspire to be more awesome at stuff like that. And so if I did it once, great. That's good job, Chase. I'll pat myself on the back. That's something that I aspire to be better at. And I'm sure you, like me, have stumbled across people who are just awesome at that. And they drop you random cool notes that are, hey, I'm thinking about you. And I saw this quote and a whatever. Yeah, I always like that. It's a good way to connect and resonate for sure.
Yeah, I'm bad on the birth dates and all that stuff. Hey, so the operative first question, you were in the Bay Area, yeah?
I'm in Seattle today, actually.
Okay, but your home base is the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you're a Golden State fan, I assume?
Of course.
Okay, are you a guy that's at all the games? Are you one of those crazy people at all the games?
Let me add some context. I am a Seattle Supersonics fan. And the Seattle Supersonics do not exist anymore because of some super crappy stuff that went down with our ownership group here in Seattle. So I have sort of extended my love based on my new geographic home base of San Francisco. I have extended my passion for the Warriors because they're an exciting team and I spend a lot of time in San Francisco. And one of my investors at Creative Live is actually one of the owners. So I will confess there's upside there as well. So I do get to go to, I'll just say, a handful of the games.
Okay. Does that mean you've had seats with perspective that perhaps are a little bit different than nosebleed?
Yes.
Okay, what can you see? I've not been yet, so one of their games at the kind of low ground level. What have you seen that we might otherwise not know from reading the papers and watching it on, whatever channel, watching the playoffs and stuff? What do you see at a ground level that just excites you about watching that team? You can name players, you can name anything you want. What has truly excited you about watching up close and personal?
The energy. There's an unmistakable energy, and this is the same energy that you and I find contagious whether we're sitting next to one another on a bus, or just someone you come in contact with at a party, or an entrepreneur or a creative, someone who's like, you can tell if they're in their zone. And there's just an energy and a vitality and a passion. You can see so closely just the camaraderie, the high fives, the fist bumps, and the shit talking and the competition, and there's just like, there's a fervor? Is that fervor? Just there's a buzz that when shit's going on, and like that team is on the rise. So that would be unmistakably, that would be the thing that I would say.
Is there a clear leader?
Oh yeah, it's Steph Curry. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the guy is the MVP of the season. First time ever in the history of the NBA that the MVP has been a unanimous decision.
Okay, most people don't have a chance to watch him play from, 20 meters away, 25 meters away. What makes him so exciting to you? When you watch him play, what inspires you about him? I can see all the stuff on TV and wow, even from a TV, I can go, hey, I've never seen that before. Up close, though, what do you see?
I see a sort of, God, how would I put that? Because it's easy to mistake. I'm talking about something that's a layer deeper than confidence. It's almost like I'll call it intuition. That he is a player who plays on intuition. And intuition, I've been talking about this a lot for the last, say, 24 months, because it has unlocked so many things for me personally. And I see that with Curry. I'll actually make ironically, a Michael Jordan reference. With Jordan talks about when you get so good at something, for Jordan, he saw the game in slow motion, where everyone else is like struggling to find the right place to pass or the right time to take a shot. What Jordan talks about is seeing the game in slow motion. And to me, how that translates into Steph Curry just plays with this intuition, knowing like just this knowledge of what the shot clock's at, knowledge of where his other players are, knowledge of his own abilities and what's possible. Like, he's shooting from deeper than pretty much any repeat performing 3-point wizard. He just is an amazing, amazing athlete, and he's got that on command. You can just see it in his eyes. And again, it's more than confidence. When you're sitting on the floor and you get to see the guy's eyes, that's a thing that would be different and has this perspective that it sounds like you're asking me about.
Let's go back in time. So as a photographer, that's your first passion, probably still never left you. But as a photographer, you've had a chance to witness a lot of people up close and personal. So I'm sure there could be a ton of stories there. But I would love for you to go back in time, really back in time. When did you pick up the camera for the first time?
For the first time, it was, I have some pictures of me with this camera. Actually, I don't know if you guys, if you want to, we can probably get you a copy of this picture.
Yeah, sure.
It's an old Instamatic, which had this really weird, like prepackaged sort of film that you dropped in it. And it had a flash cube on top of it, which is was literally like a little mini explosion. This shit's old. I'm telling you, it's like old. It was a camera that my parents had, and I just grabbed it and started taking pictures. And at first, my parents, we grew up, sort of lower middle class. And so when you're blowing through film I'll say it, in the 70s, it was like, whoa, kid, slow down. Each one of those things is expensive or whatever. I just remember certainly being drawn to it. And then it came back to me again in, I would say, sort of junior high school. I had sort of already self-identified as a jock at that point, but that creative underpinning was still very, very present. And the thing that struck me when I came back to it, 4 or 5 years later, still as a very young person, I was totally grasped, totally captured by the idea that, wait a minute, this picture, it's not just a picture. This picture is a story. It is a moment that will never happen again. This story can be told in many different ways. And if you are skilled, you can tell the story that you want to tell. I deduced that from actually my father and my grandfather. Both were hobbyist photographers, and they took a lot of pictures of me and my friends, skateboarding and snowboarding and playing soccer and football and all that stuff. As I said earlier, I kind of self-identified as an athlete at that time, although I was really more of a sort of a, I don't know, skate punky. But I just have a very vivid memory of that stories, or that photos are stories, and that you can tell a story with a picture in a very, very simple way. The classic adage, photos worth 1,000 words or whatever. But that came back to me again. We'll call that middle teens.
When were you paid for the first time as a photographer?
The first time I was paid was I had graduated college, lived out of a backpack with my then girlfriend, now wife Kate, for about 6 months. We walked all over Europe, every country from Scandinavia down to Greece and Portugal to Moscow, Russia. Just spent 6 months walking the earth. Came back to the States, realized we had no money and needed to get a job. Moved to Steamboat, Colorado. It was in Europe with my grandfather, who just passed away, gave me his cameras. I taught myself how to become a photographer, walking the streets of Europe for 6 months. I took that craft, that again, sort of just still scratching the surface, but took that craft and applied it to this life that I was living basically as a ski bum, ski and snowboard dirtbag in Steamboat, Colorado. Took a great picture of a friend of mine who was a sponsored athlete, and the company that he was riding for at the time approached me and said they'd like to license the ability to use this image in an ad. And I was paid $500 and got a free pair of skis.
Was that your first, beyond working for odd jobs somewhere earlier in your life, was that your first kind of entrepreneurial payment?
Yeah, I would say that was a great example of my first or earliest entrepreneur. I had whatever. Actually, no, that's not true. My very first, I think there are two other entrepreneurial events that preceded that one. One is when I was, I think 6. I started making films. I would wash all the cars in the neighborhood, save up enough money, buy enough film to borrow my friend's camera and have his brother record and film our script. And then we would screen this movie and invite the neighborhood. I would buy candy for 25 cents and sell it for 50 cents. And then screen our movie with a modest admission, sell out the neighbor's basement. And these films were like 6 minutes long. And, it was like a summer-long project to make a 6-minute movie. But that was one. And then another one was I lived near a golf course growing up. I would watch, there was a couple of water hazards that were public property. You'd have to hit across this river owned by the city. And so I would dive for golf balls because, a good bunch of golfers would shank it right into the water. And then on the next hole, I would sell them their golf balls back. I think Inc. magazine did a story on that, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody did, Inc. or Forbes or somebody. Two early entrepreneurial endeavors. The first real photography one was that, selling that ski picture to that company.
Let me share a brief 30-second one with you. My first entrepreneurial payment was as a photographer. Yes, this is true.
Nice.
It was probably only like $20. My parents had a decent-sized yard outside Washington, D.C. My father happened to know a local congressman. They wanted a big yard for a guy that was running for Senate. And so John Warner showed up with his new wife, Elizabeth Taylor. And so this was a huge deal 15 miles outside Washington, D.C., one of Hollywood's biggest starlets, right? I'm like 10, 12 years old, something like that. And I've got a Polaroid instant camera. And me being the obnoxious kid, and I don't know who this woman is, but she's walking around my parents' yard. She wasn't looking her best at that time, but I'm just snapping shots. And at that moment in time, as I'm snapping shots with an instant camera, old men are walking up to me with $20 bills saying, "Can I have that?" It's a true story.
I love it. Tell me you still have one of those pictures.
No, I have the picture. I have the picture of me sitting there while she's in the frame and I've got the camera around my neck, but I don't have so I'm in a picture with her, but I don't have the picture that I took of her because I sold them.
Closest. That's good proof. Close enough. You got a picture with her. That's good.
Yeah. I would love for you, before we jump into some of where you're at today, I would love for you to go back a little. We started talking about sports, and I know sports has been big to you and your background. And I'm sure, because I can think about myself, I played baseball for 10 years into my first year in college. Talk about the shaping. So many people don't get the chance to experience sports. You experienced it at a high level, Division I athletics. Talk about this some. This has shaped your life for sure and has probably played a huge role in just about everybody you meet going forward.
Yeah, it's clearly been influential for my career. Aside from just the sort of the physical benefits, it was actually the early transition into my photography career that was tied intimately to sports. I ended up being the things that people were willing to pay me to photograph myself and my friends skiing, skating, snowboarding all over the world, to get paid to take pictures of the thing that you would be doing anyway. Well, that was a huge catapult. But if you look at the underpinning, which is, I think, the nature of your question, there are so many things that I think are parallel to sports, to working with a team, to adversity, overcoming pain. A lot of that stuff that has certainly been very valuable to my life as a creative and a creative entrepreneur. Things outside of teamwork and struggle. Sometimes you're on a crappy team and you have to find a way to make something that's not working work. That's like iteration. We hear all that in sort of innovation speak these days. The hardship, having to play many positions when you're younger. It's not like you don't really specialize as a 10-year-old athlete. You kind of play a handful of things that you might be good at, and then you gravitate to the positions that you do well or to the sports that you excel at. In so many ways, that was very, very relevant to my professional career development. And then there was that, like I said earlier, that literal, like the thing that I started doing was taking pictures of the things that I knew really, really well, like skateboarding, skiing, all these action sports they were sort of fringe when I started doing it. And part of my catapult professionally was when those things just happened to just go mainstream. And I was at the right place at the right time. But, you mentioned at the high level, and I did develop a hunger to play these sports at a high level. I went to college on a soccer scholarship. I could have gone for either soccer or football. Chose soccer ultimately because the game was closer to my heart, and I had aspirations of playing professionally in Europe. We had a lot of good connections. Our family did with European soccer, aka football. And I thought for sure that was going to be my path. I was on the Olympic development team. Ultimately decided to play college soccer. That was an entree into a whole different world at a different level where you're literally doing this sport. You do it a lot as a club. When you're going to get a scholarship, you have to obviously be deeply committed to this. But this is a whole new level. Again, there's all kinds of parallels between the entrepreneurial, creative careers, what it takes to make it. And, it's actually arguably harder to be, in the top 1% of photographers, say, as it is to make it in any professional sport. The numbers they're just not in your favor. But that didn't stop me from pursuing that passion, despite everyone telling me I was going to be a starving artist and entrepreneurs are losers and all that kind of stuff. So since I had a reasonable amount of success as an athlete or a scholar athlete, I knew that it was possible. I also got a lot of insight in the mental strength. I got tapped into sports psychology as a young person because it was a top 10 Division I team that I was on. And so we had the benefit of not just great coaches, but trainers and, the whole ecosystem. One of those pieces was psychology. And, we had a team sports psychologist that would talk to us. And that gave me a lot of insight and paved a way for me to explore things like meditation, which are, deeply, I think, rooted in my ultimate career, or whether I don't know if you call it successful because I'm a midway.
Successful is, you pay for the lights to turn on. You pay the bills. I mean, that's success. I mean, there's always going to be more and more beyond that, perhaps, but ultimately you're calling the shots. And isn't that success? Is that freedom? Isn't that what we all want?
I think freedom is a great way of putting it. The freedom to decide what you're doing every day, or maybe not day to day, but with your life, and gaining or regaining that sight when it's either obscured or has been lost, I think is That's one of the reasons, for example, that Creative Live exists. It's an online education platform, and we connect the world's top experts with millions of students all over the world. And we're literally, the stories are, there's so many stories that are transformational around people like being able to live their dreams in career, in hobby, and in life. And it's an extension of something that I feel like I stumbled into. Now we've made it so a lot of other people have access to that.
Let me dig a little bit deeper on your photography before we get into Creative Live, because I really think that your background is really fascinating. And as you mentioned, look, ultimately to get to the highest levels of photography, and you are there, at least by any measure of, what do I have a note here, that you once charged hundreds, maybe it's more than one time, hundreds of thousands of dollars for one photo. So all of those artists out there, those photographers out there that want to get paid, and they hear that Chase was charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for one photo, I hope the first thing they say to themselves is, damn yes, because I don't want them to hate on that at all, because that's the inspiration, the kind of thing that I always love to hear. Tell me the unfolding of that.
I think a lot of people are looking for a pivotal moment, and it was really a very slow, pivotal 10 years of grinding.
10 years of overnight success?
Yeah, the classic 10-year overnight success. I mean, it's just people don't get tired of the overnight success story, but I really don't know any. I only know, if there's an overnight success story, the reality is that, that we have a name for that, the downside of that, which is one-hit wonder. For every person who has sort of achieved some degree of some measure of success, whether that's turning the light on or some of these other sort of benchmarks that you're naming or suggesting here, there's just a shit ton of work. It's just an absolute commitment to the craft and those things that are sort of adjacent to the craft, the business aspect of being an artist, for example. And even the idea that one of the reasons that I was very excited about art was because it was mine to define. What I thought was good, what I saw in the world and wanted to represent. And by represent, I mean sort of represent. Like that's what a photograph is. Like it's a representation of a piece of reality. And so if I wanted to repackage an idea, put my own stamp on it and share it with the world, whether in a sort of a commission context or a commercial context, shooting an ad or a commercial, then that was mine to define, as was price. You can basically charge whatever you can get, and what you can get is relative to what other people are getting, and there really is no upper limit. So all those things were fascinating to me.
Art, it seems like in the last decade, from being a fringe type term, and my mom's side of the family, all artists, painters, art has become something where I think more and more people, especially in business, entrepreneurship, look, this is the creation, the whole cloth out of one's mind, that brand new idea. That's art. And that there is no higher price than one will pay for that originality. And that is becoming more and more properly understood, I think, as time goes by, that how much value, how much worth there is into the individual that can create something that no one else imagined. Boy, there's no price that people won't pay.
I love it, and I love that it is finally getting. We throw around words like innovation and how important it is, and yet creative classes or art classes, those are some of the first to get cut, which is it's just mind blowing. And now when we've got things like AI coming on, we're like, oh my gosh, well if all these robots are going to know all this stuff, what is the key differentiator? And that's why creativity is the new literacy. It is not only is like creativity with a small c, like design and photography and filmmaking and things like that, but creativity with a capital C, the big C. Like there is not a thing on the world that has been created that did not have like nothing. Like look at the objects that are surrounding you right now, wherever you are sitting. All of those had very, very intentional, strong, creative intention behind them. Theoretical science is creativity applied to our world. We're looking like E equals MC squared as an equation that someone created in order to explain or explicate the phenomena that they saw in the world. That's highly, highly creative. I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that it's finally coming into its own. Conceptually, I think there's no mistaking that the value of creativity is at an all-time high. Now that we're finally, what happened when we put a lot of energy into sort of creating literacy? We had it was the golden era. It was like literally it was on the dark side, the backside of the dark ages. Life expectancy grew dramatically, infant mortality shrank, ideas were spread, and there was the, Enlightenment is literally the phase that followed the Gutenberg press. The same is true if we today pay attention to creating creativity, properly establishing that the value of putting two unlikely things together and to form a new thing is a highly valued, and regardless of the stats, because the stats say, I forget who did the survey, 1,500 CEOs said when surveyed that the most important thing in hiring for their team was the ability to think creatively. Number one, not number 8, or there was some consensus that it was in the top 10. No, numero uno. And it just happens to be well timed with my personal adventure. Needless to say, I love it, and it's just going to continue to rise.
I'm looking at my desk right now. I see a pair of Ray-Ban prescription glasses, and I'm only in my 40s. I see a MacBook Air. I see a bottle of Ituin green tea from Japan with all the fancy Japanese labels. And you're right. You look around wherever you're at, and you have to imagine who was paid? How was the creativity done? When did it take place? How many people were involved? Because all of these objects, there's a lot, there's so much that goes into each of them to get them to the point where they're sitting on my desk right now.
That's a lifetime of work into every one of those things. Mm-hmm. And that's, I get asked all the time, like, what kind of ideas should I pursue? And my response, just bluntly, is like, you should pursue something that you care deeply about, because if you're just chasing a market opportunity, or, this is a business idea versus something that means a lot to you, there are people for whom that means a lot. And when it comes to getting your idea to market, they're going to kick your ass because it means more than just a business opportunity. And so I talk about scratching your own itch, and all of those things that you just named they were passion projects for someone. They leaned into it and they saw more, and they realized that they knew more and could learn more and faster. And they were fueled by, again, not just some crack in the market that they could, quote, exploit. Think of Jobs and his passion for the personal computer. It's that simple.
Let's get into your current passion today, Creative Live. Describe Creative Live to the audience that's not yet understanding what it is.
Creative Live is the world's largest live education platform, and it's focused specifically on creative education, photo, video, art design, music and audio, the maker and craft movements, and then the ability to make a living and a life in all of those things. So in some cases there are sort of two groups of people that it serves. People who they've identified as creative and they want to take their craft from a 1 or a 2 up to a 10. They want to become a master. Or people who are in their jobs or struggling and realize, what, I've got something more, something different in me, and I want to explore and, leave my job as an accountant or leave my job as a salesperson and tap into that thing that everyone tells me is so risky, but I want to pursue it, either, again, for a career or just as an amazing outlet. Again, we're an online creative education platform, and the differentiator for us is that we have the world's top experts, Pulitzer Prize winners, New York Times bestselling authors. In entrepreneurship, we've got Richard Branson, Arianna Huffington, Mark Cuban. In photography, people like Vincent Laforet won the Pulitzer Prize, Sue Bryce, top 10 wedding photographers in the world. Like, it is the best of the best in each of those disciplines. We have 10,000 hours of content. We serve millions of students. We're in every country around the world every month, and we've had billions of minutes of video consumed on the platforms. I like to think it's working. It's highly differentiated. It's good. Go there. Give me some feedback.
Before we dive into a little bit more, let's take a step back and talk about scratching the itch, because this was yet another itch that you scratched in your life. The nexus here, what were you were waking up at a point in time and saying, the world needs this. You were collaborating with other people. We must do this. What's the groundwork there? What happened? What's the trigger?
Little bit of backstory. One is that I quit a bunch of things that everybody else wanted for me. So I was, as I mentioned earlier, I was basically assured that I was going to be a professional soccer player. I had planned on it. And after 4 years playing in college, I was just burned out. As much as, this is my whole life to get to this point. And if the opportunity was sitting right there in front of me, I don't think I would pick it up. I bailed on a career toward professional soccer, bailed on medical school, and dropped out of a PhD in philosophy. All of those three things were things that other people wanted for me, whether they're my parents or culture or my family or whatever. I dropped those things to become a photographer, which, my poor parents, ran them through the ringer. But ultimately, I followed my desires and explored a career in photography. As I mentioned earlier, following sort of your passion and your effort, I was able to make it into a great career. Along that way, you get to the top sort of 1%, you start seeing and learning things about the industry. So those three, sort of quitting those things, were big markers, as was the industry shifting for those things that I was photographing becoming mainstream. And I shifted my photo studio, then about 15 people, into trying to think a little bit more entrepreneurial and to try and think about not just how to take better pictures, but how to be different. And one of the things that I did was I started telling stories about what it was like to be a photographer. And this was early. This is pre-YouTube. It was Google Video. The only social platforms was really Blogger. So I started telling stories and making videos about my life and what I called about telling the story about what it was like to be a photographer. It just turned out, without, no intention of building an audience or, cultivating a tribe. Those terms didn't exist. It was about sharing sort of secrets of the industry. And I just turned around one day and there was a huge pile of people paying attention. And I realized that I was adding value through telling these stories. I went on to make hundreds of videos and incidentally created an audience of, 1 million to 2 million followers for people who are passionate about learning. And it wasn't an explicit like, hi, I'm Chase and I'm here to teach you today to do this, or the other thing. It was basically about sharing my experiences. But what I really learned was that these people wanted to learn. And they wanted to tap into sort of this idea that in a world where information wants to be free, that we could be or become, the things that we wanted to. I mentioned just a second ago that I turned my photo studio into a little bit of an incubator. In 2009, launched a photo app. It would have taken me a couple years to build up a 1 million person following, reading my blog and on the early social channels and whatnot. I launched an app in 2009 called Best Camera. That app was the first photo app that shared images direct to social networks. So you could take a picture, add cool effects, and share it to, the Best Camera online community, to Facebook, to Twitter, to Flickr, all these places with a touch of a button. Ultimately, I made this for my own, I scratched my own itch. That app went direct to number 1 in iTunes, and it ended up being app of the year. Year and change before Instagram or Path or any of these other photo sharing sites. And so it kicked off that photo sharing craze that we all take for granted now. Those things, my background in photography, seeing that these millions of people were hungry to tap into education around creativity, my flirting with this app, which I went on to be app of the year, was like, oh my God, how can we make this into a platform, where I don't have to be at the center of it because I as an individual, I wouldn't scale. How can I connect these, say 1 million people who are paying attention to what I'm doing to not just me, but my friends, peers who are the best designers in the world, the best filmmakers, photographers, directors. Wouldn't that be cool? Out of a grimy little warehouse in South Seattle, myself and co-founder Craig fired up this idea, got some sort of beater cameras, and with duct tape and household bleach, we threw our first sort of class, and it was we had 50,000 people show up, and that is what became Creative Live. Fast forward a couple years, we built a very profitable business, took on funding from Greylock, and now Creative Live is the world's largest sort of hub for creative education.
Share a kind of a fun side note to that, talking about big numbers quickly. I sat down with a lady the other day in Saigon, Vietnam, and she was part of the first social media platform before Facebook in 2003, 2004, a multiplayer game site. Now, this is a country of 90 million people. At the time, there was 45 million under the age of 25. So they launched this multiplayer game site. They had 10 million users the first day.
What?
Crazy, right? Wow. I just looked at her. I said, man, you knew your life changed big time at that moment. She's like, yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, I can't even fathom. I was, again, I think there's so many things that play into it, like hard work, scratching your own itch, timing, opportunity, all the market stuff. There's so many things we can't control. It's hard to take credit. I love stories about when things all gel, right, regardless if it was, it's never all intention. There's always some elements of luck.
You mentioned the PhD pursuit in philosophy. Does that mean you will occasionally still turn on a YouTube video and watch Dan Dennett and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins all chit chat away? Yeah.
You dropped some names there. Those are high-powered philosophers. Yeah, I still consider myself an armchair philosopher. More than anything, though, I use those critical thinking and critical talking, like the ability to talk about art, the philosophy of art, which was my focus. That it's a great tool to have in the toolbox for explaining that subjectivity, and what people are paying for is not the actual pixels of a picture or the paint on the canvas, but they're paying for something much larger. They're paying for an idea. They're paying for an execution. They're paying for the vision ultimately. And you want to, that's what the best entrepreneurs are. Sure, there's a very hardcore piece of execution, but vision, if you've got the right vision and then you have to go execute, if you can do those things together, bam, that's powerful. So it gave me a tool set for sharing those ideas more than anything. And my parents were, what are you going to philosophize about? Like being unemployed? And, ironically, I find that I use that skill set every day, which is thinking and talking about art and creativity. So
it's sometimes hard, I think, when I talk to someone like yourself that's been an entrepreneur, you've gone down this path, it's hard to recall back to the exact steps that you might have taken early on, because you're an entirely different person now. Because I think so many people want this checkbox of like things to do. And it gets back to some of the education that you've been talking about. And still, even though today maybe we see this rise of the art and this rise of the creativity, so many people are still going through their lives in rote memorization, worried about passing the test. If I pass the test, there will be somebody there that will bless me, give me a job, and my life will be taken care of. And then when you're 45 years old, they take away all interest income and the stock market collapses by 50% and you have nothing.
Which is why I love that you just laid that on the tee for me, because I'm going to knock it out right now. This is the first time where it's actually riskier to do the traditional thing. And I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of explaining what the traditional is. You know it. It's the thing that everyone tells you should do. Go to work or, get good grades, go to school, go to a good college, then leave college and get a good job and start, saving your pension, all that kind of stuff. This is the first time where that's actually the riskier behavior. And I stand by that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. I've seen you say this. Adventure propels life.
Yes, it does. When I get asked a lot because of, it's a very common idea for a creative to get blocked, or even an entrepreneur. Like I've been going at this the same, and I can't, solve this problem. Those of us who are maybe overly stubborn or hardworking to detriment will just continue to bash our heads into the brick wall. And what we do is we get dumber, or we'll stay up 3 nights in a row trying to solve the problem. And that there's all kinds of lore and beautiful story culturally around that, but that's just a myth. And ultimately, there are a handful of tactics that you can do to change how you look at a problem. Like adventure for me has always been an igniter of new ideas or a fresh approach. And whether that adventure is, that adventure scales to fit whatever time you can give it. And if you can give it a day or an afternoon.
Add some color, your best adventures, travel, get me outside the United States of America. Chase is on the lam. You are somewhere. It's a photography event taking place. Something's happening. What are 2 or 3 of the adventures that you've been on that most people don't get a chance to experience?
I think that there's a belief that traveling has to be expensive. And I will tell you that it does not have to be. If you can travel, like put all your stuff in a bag, or scratch that, sell most of your stuff, put some stuff in a bag, just enough, about a third of what you think you need, and then just go somewhere in your own country. It can be very, very cheap. You can live on, just literally a couple dollars a day. And I did that. I saved up a little bit of money through high school and through college, used that money, bought a cheap ass. Actually, I was gifted a mileage plane ticket flew to Europe with no intention with my then girlfriend, now wife, Kate, and we walked the earth for like 6 months. Game changer for me. Opened my eyes to so many different things. It has absolutely been critical to who I am today. And I already, tapped into that story a little bit earlier. That's just one example of adventure. I think another example of adventure would be New Zealand. Again, this is a little bit more exotic, and I'll try and find something that's a little more simple. What I love about New Zealand is specifically relative to photography, but it doesn't have to be. That's just sort of my calling, was that there's so much earth in such a small place. There are insane mountain peaks and the most amazing beaches within a couple of hours from one another. There is the most lush and crazy forests and glaciers adjacent to one another. So you can see and experience so much in a very, very little beautiful place like New Zealand. And it's very cheap. I mean, relatively cheap. I think I want to make sure to flag that there are people for whom, living on single dollars a day in their home country is it's a struggle. So I don't want to ignore that cross section of the population. But I imagine for most of the people who are listening to your show, for relatively cheap, these are accessible. And what people have to get over is I have a mortgage, I have these things, I have all these things that have bound me to be, and I'm therefore not free. I believe that that's a story that we tell ourselves, and that adventure, it doesn't always have to be New Zealand or Europe. An adventure can be, how are you going to go spend some time with your feet on the earth in nature? Are you going to get in the car and drive across the country because you've always wanted to do it? I mean, these are things that cost hundreds of dollars, not that much more.
You make a great point with that, though. So many people, the mortgage, et cetera, that's the sunk cost. It's already paid for. Stop thinking about it. What you're really missing out on, the opportunity cost of not going to New Zealand.
For sure. What's the saying? If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Yeah. And the same is true with life and adventure. And I'm not saying that, I love being at home. As someone who travels hundreds of thousands of miles on an airplane every year, I really enjoy being at home or at our little family cabin that's been in the family for 100 years. Just something very, very, very simple. But what is the price for not doing these things that I would say are calling you? Because if you're thinking about it and you're like, man, I'm in a rut and I need to change this or that, that's a great example of, hey, dude, I need to get my butt in gear and go do something different. And the stories, I'm a big believer. Brene Brown, I don't know if you know Brene's work. She's really helped me understand so much of what goes on in our head, our stories that we tell ourselves, and we decide we are the narrator of that story, and we could just as easily be telling ourselves a different story. I would ask the listeners at home, like, what stories are you telling yourselves that are keeping you back? Is it the mortgage? Like, oh yeah, I've got this mortgage. Okay, great. Your family either does love you or doesn't love you. And if your family doesn't love you, you got a different set of problems. If they do love you and you went to them and said, hey, look I'm having sort of an existential crisis. I don't want this to be a burden on the family. How can we change, downsize, upside, left side, whatever we can do to live a different existence? And I need to shake this up. I need to pursue this sort of calling, and I don't want to do so in a vacuum. And so how can we sort of plan this out together? And I've said this little bit before, this little ditty here that I'm sharing with you. And I've had people go away and come back and say, oh my God, I listened to you on X podcast and you said this, and you know what? I did it and my life is totally different. I can't believe it. I mean, it's literally that simple that we're all telling ourselves. It's not always that simple. Let's be real. But I just am I am deeply aware that we all tell ourselves some unique story that ultimately is just like everybody else's story. And it's how busy we are, how, tied down. And I think it's fiction.
As long as they're not going to kill me, I want to go anywhere.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've been to those places and they're not all that awesome. But ultimately, I think the point stands, which for me, adventure is a great reset, a great perspective changer. And that's what it's all about, really, is perspective, right?
The big question, I think so many people, they listen to your story and it reminds me so much of myself, different contexts, different circumstances, but it's still just the guy that's kind of wandering and not wandering without thinking, but just following what comes along and then pursuing it with every bit of energy you can. How does a person shift? So many people are actually not just going down the path of adventure. When does someone know it's time? Is there a triggering moment? I mean, is it a depression? Is it something? When does someone know you've got to like literally just get on the plane and go to Bangkok? You've got to get on the plane and go to Tokyo or UAE. You've just got to go tomorrow. When does someone know you've reached the point that, man, you've got to do a self-intervention right now?
Wow.
Yeah, good one, huh? I just made that one up.
I like it. Well, let's see.
You're just sitting there having a normal evening.
I'm in Seattle right now.
Okay, so you're in Seattle, you're having a normal night, and all of a sudden I'm asking you, how do you save the person that needs to jump? They want to jump, Chase. Tell them how the hell to jump. You've been jumping for a long time.
I'm going to reference a dear friend who I think has framed this question, which I think is a fabulous question, more eloquently and simply than I've heard it before. And that's a friend, Chris Guillebeau. And Chris is an amazing best-selling author. He wrote The $100 Startup. So Chris Guillebeau says, you have to ask yourself two questions. One is this working? Is what you're doing right now working? And two, do I still believe in it? So you see, you got a couple of questions, because you can say, is this working? No. Do I still believe in it? Hell yes. Well, then stick with what you're doing. If, for example, you say, is this working? Hell no. My life's not what I want it to be. Do I still believe in this thing I'm doing? No, I've lost faith. Then what are you going to do? You're absolutely going to change. So if you can use those two questions as a very simple filter of, should I take action? The name of the book is Born for This. It just came out. Chris Guillebeau, fantastic guy, runs an amazing event called the World Domination Summit. Good friend. Cannot recommend him or his readings or his writings enough. Great guy. And that's just one little nugget. So I think asking yourself those questions is a very powerful way of understanding your individual situation. Now, to take a step back from that, there historically, if you wanted to me, this is the thing. It's like, this is what school should teach you, which it A, doesn't, and B, never will, because school, as we know, will change dramatically over the next few years and certainly over the next decade. It's just not capable of evolving in the way that we are capable of evolving as people. We used to live in a culture where you went to school, got a job, and stayed at that career for 40 years, got the gold watch. If our parents had one job, we will have 5. The next generation will have 5 at the same time. There's no way that a big brick building covered in ivy on a hill that costs $30,000 a year to go to is going to be the solution for you understanding what your next chapter is. For some people, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you need a piece of paper to prove that you're certified to follow this passion. Yes, you're going to have to go there. But for everybody else, and this is like a 90-10 thing, for the 90% of people who that does not apply to, you need to be able to sample, to test, to learn in a lightweight, but with the potential for high degree of success. And how do you do that? You learn from people who have actually done it, not people who are theorizing, the people who are the experts. And that's what Creative Live is. Sorry, I feel like I just started really ranting there, but I think the question, the two-part
good.
question.
I'm glad I got it out of you. I wanted a little rant there.
And then, but when you figure out that, the current thing I'm doing is not working, how can I make change? The world should teach you that quitting and changing is okay. Everybody who I know who's successful has probed so many different ways of pursuing their passion that when they find it, it's so non-linear. So what are the places we can go as a culture to tap into this?
But you make a great example about the schools, though, because look, you're right. If you go to where all the ivy is and you sit there, Look, the best professors are already on YouTube. I just watched last night this guy, Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, and I watched him give, a 20-minute presentation saying blank is a form of schizophrenia. Somebody can go figure out what the blank is. I don't want to cause a furor on our episode right now, but the point being is that the best professors are accessible. You don't have to go to their university. You can, if you really want to learn, go to where the best learning is, go to where the insights are, but don't monopolize your time with some twisted memorization, something another. Listen, we could go off on a huge tangent for another 3 hours about that topic. Chase, Creative Live. I think everyone should check it out. Best website is creativelive.com, right?
Yep, that's the way to find us out on there. Just basically at Creative Live on everything, all of the social channels. So please check it out. Sign up for a class. There's a freemium model, so you can watch stuff for free 24/7 in any of those disciplines. And if you see something you like, you want to watch it on your own time, super cheap, the great access to the world's top experts.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Hey, I remember, let's go back to that time sitting next to each other on the bus to Tim Ferriss's dinner. Here we go, full circle, right?
You got something like that, right? Yeah. Hey, man, it was good, and hopefully we'll catch up in person one day soon.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on the show.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.